means, in short, writing a new chapter in the history of our relationship, building a completely different model of cooperation and based on trust and mutual respect.
Billions of euros mobilized in 2 years to revolutionize relations with Africa through the Mattei Plan, from the cold of Brussels to the heat of Addis Ababa. Welcomed by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali, the President of the Council Meloni participates in the second Italo Africans Summit that takes place on the eve of the African Union Summit. The Mattei Plan, a bridge between Europe and Africa, is once again at the center of the meeting, as Meloni emphasizes, which also addresses the migration problem, a phenomenon that must be fought, she explains, to avoid having cheap labor in a relationship of trust between nations.
The old quote, often attributed to Mark Twain, goes that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Well, right now, events in northern Ethiopia seem determined to repeat with only the bare minimum effort at rhyming. Just 4 years after a shaky peace agreement ended the Tigray War, one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 21st century, the key players seem determined to relive that experience. On the northern border, Eritrean troops have been accused of crossing into the shattered region. To the south, the federal government of Ethiopia appears to be massing armor, and the Tigray Defense Forces are mobilizing for a fight. If history is rhyming, it's being real lazy about it. The geopolitical equivalent of declaring he was a poet, but he didn't know it. Yet, look below the surface and it becomes clear that a second Tigray war will be fundamentally different from what came before. After fighting on the same side last time, Ethiopia and Eritrea are now on the brink of conflict, with Eritrea backing its former Tigrayan foes. The Amhara militias that helped Addis Ababa are now trying to overthrow the government in their own uprising. And next door, the sprawling civil war in Sudan keeps threatening to sweep over the borders. In short, renewed conflict in Tigray looks set to be a distorted echo of the last round, but one that could still have devastating consequences for the entire MENA region.
Rome, March 3rd, 1896. You're standing in Piazza Montecitorio. The crowd is massive, angry, growing by the minute. Someone shouts, "Down with the government." The chant spreads like fire. Death to Baratieri. The police form lines, batons drawn, but the crowd isn't backing down. Because 2 days ago, news arrived from Africa. 7,000 Italian soldiers died, an entire army annihilated, by Ethiopians, by Africans. The unthinkable has happened. You watch a man tear down a recruitment poster and spit on it. Another throws rocks at the Parliament building. The police charge. People scatter. Blood on the cobblestones. But something else is happening in that crowd. Something darker than rage. You can see it in their faces. This isn't just anger about a military defeat. Put yourself in their place. This is humiliation. National humiliation. The kind that doesn't heal. The kind that festers. And 40 years from now, Italy will still be trying to erase this moment. They'll use poison gas, tanks, airplanes. They'll bomb hospitals, burn villages, kill hundreds of thousands. Not for territory, not for resources, for revenge. This is the story of how one African victory became Italy's national wound. How defeat turned into obsession, and how a battle fought in 1896 would poison Italian politics for 2 generations, until a dictator named Mussolini finally screamed the words Italy had been waiting 4 decades to hear. To understand why Italy became obsessed with revenge, you need to understand what Adwa actually meant. Because this wasn't just a military defeat. This was an existential crisis. Here's the part they don't tell you. Italy in 1896 was barely 30 years old as a unified nation. They're desperate to prove they belong at the table with Britain, France, and Germany. Desperate to be taken seriously. And the way you prove yourself in the 1890s? Colonies, Africa, empire. So when Prime Minister Francesco Crispi sends an army to conquer Ethiopia, he's not just grabbing territory. He's trying to buy Italy's way into the club of great powers. March 1st, 1896, Battle of Adwa. 100,000 Ethiopians under Emperor Menelik II face 17,000 Italians under General Oreste Baratieri. It's a massacre. By sunset, 7,000 Italians are dead. 3,000 are prisoners. Baratieri is running for his life. And Europe is in shock, because this isn't supposed to happen. African armies don't defeat European powers. The entire colonial project is built on the assumption of European superiority, military superiority, cultural superiority, racial superiority. And Ethiopia just shattered that assumption in front of the entire world. Italy doesn't just lose a battle. They lose credibility, respect, their place at the table. Imagine being told you don't belong by the very empires you're trying to impress. And back in Rome, the government collapses. Crispi resigns in disgrace. Baratieri is court-martialed. The entire colonial project is abandoned. But here's what doesn't collapse. The shame, the rage, the desperate need to prove that Adwa was a fluke, an accident, something that must be corrected. Italian historian Tripodi later writes that the roots of Italian fascism can be traced directly back to Adwa. Back to this defeat, back to the perceived need to avenge what happened on that Ethiopian mountain. Adwa isn't just a battle Italy lost, it's a national trauma. And traumas don't heal, they metastasize. For the next 20 years, Italy tries to move on. They focus on Libya, on consolidating Eritrea and Somalia, on World War I. But Adwa never goes away. In military academies, officers study the battle obsessively, not to learn lessons, to find excuses. The terrain was wrong, the maps were bad. Baratieri was incompetent. Anything to avoid the real conclusion, Ethiopia outfought them. In nationalist circles, Adwa becomes a rallying cry. Revenge, vendetta, reclaiming honor. It's not rational, it's emotional, visceral. You're an Italian teenager in 1910. You grow up hearing stories about Adwa, about Italian soldiers slaughtered by barbarians, about prisoners castrated, about a national disgrace that must be avenged. This isn't history to you. This is a wound that hasn't closed. World War I made it worse. Italy joins the Allies, fights for 4 years, loses 600,000 men. And at the peace conference in Versailles, they get almost nothing, a few scraps of territory, no colonies, no respect. Italian nationalists are furious. They fought, they bled, and they're still treated like a joke in Europe. Still remembered for Adwa. Into this resentment walks Benito Mussolini. Mussolini understood something fundamental about Italian psychology in the 1920s. The country doesn't just want prosperity. It wants vindication. It wants to prove it's not weak, not laughable, not the nation that lost to Africans. And Mussolini promises them exactly that. He'll restore the Roman Empire. He'll make Italy feared. He'll erase the shame. And everyone knows what that means. Ethiopia. Because Adwa isn't ancient history to Mussolini's followers. It was yesterday. It's the wound that never healed. It's the score that must be settled. Mussolini doesn't say it explicitly at first, but nationalist groups do. Military journals do. They publish articles titled The Debt of Honor, Unfinished Business, Adwa Must Be Avenged. And in 1935, Mussolini decided the time had come. October 3rd, 1935. 200,000 Italian soldiers invaded Ethiopia from Eritrea and Somalia. Tanks, airplanes, artillery, the largest colonial invasion in African history. But this isn't about colonies. Listen to what Mussolini says to his generals. This is not a war of conquest. This is a war of civilization, honor, and of revenge. First target, Adwa itself. October 6th, 1935. Italian forces capture the town. And they don't just occupy it. They stage a ceremony. Fascist propaganda films show Italian soldiers marching through Adwa's streets, planting the Italian flag, symbolically erasing 1896. But that's not enough. The Italians tear down the obelisk at Axum, Ethiopia's holiest site, and ship it to Rome. They place it in front of the Ministry of Colonies, a trophy. Proof that Ethiopia has been humiliated just like Italy was. Emperor Haile Selassie appeals to the League of Nations, pleads for help. The League debates, imposes sanctions, but excludes oil and coal. The sanctions are toothless, performative, because Europe doesn't want to stop Italy. They want to see if fascist aggression can be contained without war. Ethiopia is the test case, the sacrifice. And Italy doesn't just invade, they brutalize. Mussolini authorizes chemical weapons, mustard gas, dropped from aeroplanes on soldiers and civilians. Ethiopian wounded lie in fields, skin burning, lungs dissolving. Medical units are targeted deliberately, hospitals bombed. This is the moment revenge stops pretending to be justice. Italian General Rodolfo Graziani earns the nickname the Butcher of Fezzan for his scorched earth tactics. Entire villages burned. Survivors were deported to camps. Tens of thousands dead. Why? Because Mussolini doesn't just want victory. He wants Ethiopia to suffer, to feel what Italy felt in 1896, to be humiliated in front of the world. May 5th, 1936. 5 seconds, Pietro Badoglio enters Addis Ababa. The war is officially over. Ethiopia has fallen. And Mussolini stands on a balcony in Rome. Hundreds of thousands of Italians packed into the piazza below. They're cheering, ecstatic. Listen carefully to what they're cheering for, waving flags. And Mussolini screams the words Italy has been waiting 40 years to hear. Adua è vendicata. Adwa has been avenged. The crowd erupts, not because they gained an empire, but because the wound is finally closed. The shame is finally erased. 40 years of national humiliation purged in one sentence. But here's the thing about revenge. It doesn't fix anything. It just creates new wounds. Ethiopia's occupation lasted 5 years. Italian forces killed between 300,000 and 500,000 Ethiopians. Mustard gas, mass executions, famine from destroyed crops. But Ethiopia never surrenders. Resistance fighters harass Italian positions, ambush supply lines, bleed the occupation. And the cost to Italy? Catastrophic. The Ethiopian war drains Italy's economy. Budget deficits explode. Tax increases are resented. Resources that should go to rebuilding Italy are dumped into holding a country that doesn't want to be held. international sanctions isolate Italy, push them closer to Nazi Germany. By 1936, Mussolini and Hitler were allies. The Rome-Berlin axis is born. World War II started 3 years later, and by 1941, British forces and Ethiopian resistance fighters liberated Addis Ababa. Italy's empire in Africa collapses. Eritrea is lost. Somalia is lost. Ethiopia is free again. All that revenge, all that blood, all that treasure, for 5 years of occupation. The fascist dream of avenging Adwa didn't restore Italy's honor. It destroyed Italy's future. By 1943, Mussolini was overthrown. By 1945, he was executed by partisans. And today, Italy doesn't teach the Ethiopian war in schools, doesn't build memorials, doesn't acknowledge the atrocities. The national wound that drove 40 years of obsession is now a national silence. But Ethiopia remembers. Every March 2nd, they celebrate Adwa, not as ancient history, as proof that they stood against the empire and won. Twice. Here's what you need to understand about revenge. It's never about the original wound. It's about ego, about pride, about refusing to accept reality. And this is where the story turns on itself. Italy lost at Adwa because Ethiopia was better armed, better led, and better prepared. That's it. No excuses, no asterisks. But admitting that would have meant accepting that Africans could be equals, that European superiority was a lie. The entire colonial project was built on mythology. So instead, Italy spent 40 years obsessing, festering, building a fascist regime whose primary foreign policy goal was avenging one defeat. And in the end, revenge didn't make Italy great. It made Italy monstrous. 7,000 dead at Adwa became 500,000 dead in the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. One humiliation became chemical warfare. One lost battle became genocide. So remember this. Adwa wasn't just a battle. It was a mirror. It showed Italy what they didn't want to see. And instead of learning from it, they spent 4 decades trying to break the mirror. The wound didn't heal. It spread. And by the time Mussolini screamed, Adwa has been avenged, the disease had already consumed the nation. Revenge isn't justice, it's poison.